Hey, this is Warren Redlick. Lucid Motors just had their first earnings call, the Q3 2021 earnings call. Are you ready to hear about it? Let's go. So there was not a lot of new information in the earnings call, and I don't have enough information to say, aha, I caught them. Some things I was a little unclear about, some things still left me a little bit suspicious, but largely there just wasn't a lot of information here to be able to say one thing or another. It has to do with the timing. Q3 ended September 30th. Lucid didn't deliver vehicles until after September 30th. So the earnings report doesn't include the recent vehicle deliveries. So there's not a lot of detail there. It was a 24-page report. Only 3 or 4 pages were actual financial numbers. A lot of that was repeated information. There's just not a lot of content here. But there was an earnings call. There was some commentary. Let's go through what we do have. This is not a gotcha Lucid video. This is just, I'm going to try to be objective and show this is what they said and this is what we can interpret from it. This is just the outline that they gave at the beginning of their document showing what's included. And you can see that down here at page 19 is the financials. And 19 is just a slide saying financials. And 24, the last page, is just a page saying end. So it's 20, 21, and 22, maybe 23. It's like 3 or 4 pages of financials out of a 24-page document. A lot of fluff, a lot of pictures, typical for Lucid. There's a lot of fluff and not a lot of content. That doesn't mean it's a fraud. It's just, hey, how about giving us some more substantial information? There isn't a lot of information yet, because like I said, they haven't done a lot, but I'm going to pick apart a little bit here and there. Now, here are some key statistics that Lucid pointed out that they felt were important. You can see greater than 13,000 reservations. That's as of the end of September. They say that's increased to greater than 17,000 as of mid-November. So 17,000 orders, that's still less than 1/3 of Rivian's orders. It is, I don't know, maybe 1/100th of the Cybertruck orders. Who knows how many orders there are for Model Y and Model 3 standard range. We know there's 100,000 orders from Hertz for Model 3 standard range. We know there's a lot of orders for Model Y. They're all backlogged, some of them 11 months. So 17,000 orders is better than nothing, but it's not really that impressive. And now another key detail, order book over $1.3 billion in estimated bookings. Not clear to me what they meant. Was that $1.3 billion in bookings for the 13,000 orders, or was it $1.3 billion in bookings for the 17,000 orders? As I heard the investor call, I think Sherry House, the CFO, said that the $1.3 billion in estimated bookings is for the 13,000 orders. So that works out to about an average selling price of $100,000. Although, is it greater than 13,000 like 13,800? Is it 13,001? Makes a little bit of a difference. But $1.3 billion in estimated bookings, average selling price of $100,000. We'll see. And cash on hand, $4.8 billion. This was a surprise to me. I didn't think they would have that much cash on hand. I'm going to go in more depth on cash later in this video. Heavy financial highlights page. This is before the main set of financials, and it's basically the same information repeated. You can see up top cash and cash equivalents as of September 30th, 2021. They had about $4.8 billion in cash. That is up from $600 million in cash December 31st, 2020. Now, this is a particularly odd thing. When you read Tesla's quarterly investment numbers, they compare one quarter to the previous quarter. So you would have Q3 versus Q2, Q1, etc. Lucid doesn't have a report for Q2. So for some reason, they're giving us, in a lot of cases, 9-month reports. This is where we are September 30, 2021, as compared to December 31, 2020. It's not clear why they're not comparing to June 30th, 2021. That would be, compare quarter on quarter. They're leaving that out. It's not clear why they do some reports where they have quarter ended 9/30/2021 versus Q3 of 2020, but they didn't compare Q3 to Q2 of 2021. It's an odd thing for me. I'm not clear why they did it that way. I have a feeling that they were skimpy on details where the details didn't look good for them. That's just an opinion. So you have total assets of $6.1 billion, up from $1.4 billion. These things, there's something iffy here. They raised $4.4 billion in the SPAC merger. 4.4 plus 1.4 would be 5.8. Somehow they added an extra $300 million in assets here. $4.4 billion from 600 million would get you to 5 billion, but they also spent $1 billion in free cash flow. They burned $1 billion in cash. So they should have added 3.4 billion to this and ended up at 4 billion. Somehow they ended up at 4.8 billion. Where'd the extra $800 million come from? I don't understand how that worked. I don't understand where the extra money came from. There's another chart that I'll show you where they claim they had $5.2 billion raised from financing, but we only know about the 4.4 billion. So where'd the extra $800 million in financing come from? We'll talk about that later. And you can see net loss, comprehensive loss of $1.5 billion. These numbers don't necessarily mean a lot, and that's on a 9-month cycle. So they're losing, ballpark $2 billion a year. Their free cash flow, they're burning well over $1 billion a year. Without having individual quarterly numbers, we don't know whether they just didn't spend cash in the previous quarter and they were holding back their spending, waiting for things. It's not really clear what's going on because we don't have enough detail. So the cynical Warren says they're hiding something by not using those numbers. But on its face, these numbers aren't bad, and that's why they chose to use these numbers. I have another document here. This is from the Financials Consolidated Statement of Operations and Comprehensive Loss, and you can see cost of revenue, $3.3 million. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. Loss from operations, half a billion dollars. And in the 9 months ending, they had $1 billion loss. There's this figure here, change in fair value of forward contracts of $454 million. They don't explain anywhere in the document that I could see what exactly this $454 million thing is. Is this money they lost? Is this money they gained? What were these forward contracts about? They don't explain any of it. Net loss here, you can see the 1.5 billion again. You can see net loss attributable to common stockholders of 3.7 billion because of some deemed dividend. There's a lot of, none of this was explained that I could see anywhere in the document. This is one of those things where you have a $2 billion number here. Somebody should have explained this, and none of the analysts asked. So maybe it's obvious to analysts, and I just don't get it. But something was odd there. Again, you can see this is another one of the financials, and you can see the information's repeated: the $500 million loss for the 3 months, and the $1.5 billion for the 9 months. There was a stock-based compensation charge of $237 million. There's a little bit of an explanation of that in the investor call. Didn't seem like a big deal. You can see EBITDA adjusted gets to $245 million loss for the quarter, $650 million loss for 9 months. Free cash flow, you can see they burned $384,000 in the quarter and $1 billion for 9 months. Again, you burned $1 billion. Something's odd here. I don't know enough to say whether it's just accounting and I don't understand it or whether there's something wrong. I don't know. Now, another part of the report was they kept talking about how they're increasing production capacity. So you can see here their first manufacturing plant production capacity of up to 34,000 vehicles per year. They're doing a phase 2 expansion of that factory to add 2.85 million square feet of production footprint. After completion of phase 2, Lucid's production capacity will increase to 90,000 vehicles per year across the Lucid Air and Lucid's Project Gravity SUV. This is the claim. Now, this is where I see something that troubles me, and let me show you what I mean. This is a shot from the YouTube channel Bear's Workshop, and you can see November 12th, 2021. You can see this is the area that they're supposedly working on to develop the expansion of the factory. And you can see it's basically dirt, and dirt has been moved around. Okay, so that's November 12th drone footage. That's just a few days ago. And you can see Bear's Workshop is showing this. Let me show you one other angle of it. This is another angle from the same day. You can see the actual factory in the background. You can see there's this area where they have a lot of dirt, and some dirt has been moved around. Now, let me show you something. This is another drone shot from Bear's Workshop from May 23rd, 2021. When Lucid Motors was supposedly working on expansion of the factory. And you can see that it's a bunch of dirt. And yes, in 6 months, they have moved some dirt around. But what are they waiting for? They've been telling us they've been working on expanding the factory since roughly May, maybe before May. They've been moving dirt around for 6 months. This is, if I have one bomb in the middle of all this. This is it. They keep telling us they're making progress on expanding the factory, and all they've been doing for 6 months is moving dirt around. This troubles me. If I were a Lucid shareholder, I would be troubled by the fact that they spent 6 months moving dirt around. Tesla built Giga Shanghai in about 11 months. They didn't waste 6 months moving dirt around. They built the damn factory. What the hell are you doing with the dirt? Why aren't you why haven't you poured concrete? Why haven't you started actually building the damn factory? What is going on? If you're going to be expanding the factory and you're going to tell us you're expanding the factory and you're making all this progress, then do something more than move dirt around. This is it. I mean, you can go to Bear's Workshop. You can search on Bear's Workshop, search for Lucid May, and you will see this video from May 23rd, 2021. And you can go back and see the other one. They just there. Let's go back. Here we are. They moved dirt around. They got some more tractors out there and stuff. They haven't poured concrete. Let's see the other angle again. These are both same day, November 12th, 3 days ago. Where did you do something? They moved dirt around. 6 months, all they've done is move dirt around. Bear's been out there for 6 months doing drone videos of what's going on at the Lucid factory, and they're just moving dirt around. At some point, you got to pour some concrete or do something, and they're not. So this is, if I have one thing that's like the big thing that makes it look like more of a fraud, it's like, well, when are you going to actually do something? What's going on? I mean, this is why they, didn't burn that much cash, because they haven't done anything. Now, they have more detail on the cash flows, and you can see they used $745 million for operating activities, $300 million for investing activities, net cash provided by financing activities of $5.23 billion or $5.24 billion. But they kept saying they raised $4.4 billion in the SPAC merger. Where did the extra $800 million come from? It's not spelled out anywhere. Nobody talked about it. Where did that money come from? So the net increase in cash is $4.2 billion, but you had $1 billion of negative cash flow. So that would explain, you have the net increase of $5.2 billion. You drop the billion in negative cash flow. So, okay, that's it. But there's $800 million in cash from financing that's unexplained. I don't remember them raising $800 million of cash. They don't have any debt. Did they sell stock somewhere between December 31 and now? I don't remember that happening. I don't know where they got that cash. So that's a curious detail. So I want to take you through some clips from the investor call. Let's listen bit by bit.
With such demand across the Lucid Air lineup, we felt it critical to accelerate the expansion of our advanced manufacturing plant, or our AMP-1 factory in Arizona. Essentially investing in our capabilities to mitigate future business risks.
So that's the factory that he's talking, the factory expansion that he's talking about that you just saw they're pushing dirt around. Where's the expansion? I don't find that credible, but I'm a big Lucid cynic, so maybe I'm not being fair.
This process started in Q3, with progress well underway on the addition of 2.85 million square feet of manufacturing space to our Arizona factory.
He says starting in Q3, but Bear's Workshop was videoing in Q2 of supposed efforts to expand the factory. They were already working on it in Q2. That's why Bear's Workshop was there making those videos. That was May. May and June are still Q2. So what were they doing in May and June when Bear's Workshop was there? Because Bear's Workshop was under the impression they were already working on the factory expansion. So what changed between Q2 and Q3? And when in Q3 did you start doing this work? And what was noticeably different? Because it looks to me like you were just pushing dirt around.
This expansion will allow for a significant increase in production capacity for Lucid Air and enable production of the Gravity SUV in 2023.
So, they're expanding. This is the same detail. They're expanding AMP-1, Advanced Manufacturing Plant 1, to enable up to 90,000 vehicles, including Air and Project Gravity. That's the story that they're telling. I think it's an iffy story because you're just pushing dirt around, but okay. So let's listen to Peter talking about expanding internationally next.
Lucid continues to grow its operations in the US, but as part of our growth strategy, and more specifically, our international strategy, We intend to expand our sales, maintenance, repair services, and manufacturing activities outside of the US, again with the goals of mitigating business risk and charging future growth. On the retail and service front, we're looking to expand our footprint in Europe and the Middle East, and we expect to enter these markets in 2022. There has been continued expansion of the team in both regions, with key additions to leadership and the employee base.
I just want to note that he mentioned the Middle East. And during the analyst questions, which I didn't include, I'm not including in this video, there was a question about Saudi Arabia. And Peter said that Saudi Arabia was the biggest market outside of the US for Lucid's vehicles, or the biggest number of booked orders outside of the US was Saudi Arabia. So obviously Saudi Arabia being the largest investor in Lucid Motors, they have an interest in it. So obviously they're going to have some kind of facilities in Saudi Arabia. When they say the Middle East, that's obviously what they mean is Saudi Arabia. He calls it the Middle East, but it's the Saudis.
And we're excited by the prospects of these key regions. We believe this will help establish Lucid as a global brand and address untapped market demand in these regions on an entirely new level, while also taking action to address climate change through sustainable mobility.
So to me, that's kind of blowhardy. I'm not so sure that it makes sense to do international expansion like this before you've got your manufacturing down. The market in the US is plenty big. Market in US and Canada, let's say, is plenty big. For you to be spending cash expanding your footprint internationally seems questionable to me. I don't get it. I can't say it's wrong. It just seems like, get your main thing done before you start playing games like that. But Lucid is doing what Lucid is doing. I can't say they're wrong. It makes me if I was an investor, I'd be a little uncomfortable. You're expanding to Saudi Arabia and Europe, and he said they're not expanding to China yet. That was part of the analyst question, that even though China's a big market, that's next. They're not doing that yet. But it's a lot of overhead to have sales operations and service operations all over the world when you're still struggling to get your manufacturing down. And let's face it, they haven't scaled manufacturing yet. It seems like they're getting ahead of themselves. Given that it's such a high-end vehicle, maybe you need to be able to address broad markets. I'm not saying it's wrong. It seems uncomfortable to me. Really quick, they delivered vehicles in October 30th, and they just delivered more vehicles this weekend. Listen to what Peter has to say about the deliveries this past weekend.
Now, this preceded an increasing number of deliveries nationwide slated for this month and next, including more than 24 deliveries to paying customers that occurred just this past weekend.
More than 24, that would be more than 24, so it sounds like 25 vehicles delivered this past weekend to paying customers. Does that include employees? That's the kind of thing where you guys know I have very little trust for anything Peter Rawlinson says. If you take that on top of the vehicles that were delivered on October 30th, it sounds like they're at 30 plus deliveries for the year. I have a limited amount of trust. If you're delivering to employees, I don't think that counts. What does paying customer mean? How many of the paying customers are employees? Because to me, employee deliveries aren't the same as delivering to non-employees. Delivering to, investors who have big stakes in the company, it's not the same as delivering to just people who are outsiders. And we're not really going to know the answer on how many deliveries they really had, how much revenue they really had until sometime in 2022, because that's the Q4 numbers, because the vehicles were delivered in Q4. So they didn't book any revenue here. And that'll come up later in this video. We'll talk about that a little bit more. So now let's get into what they said about orders.
Now, the fantastic experiences customers and media had with the Lucid Air to date have only increased interest in the brand. The result is an accelerated pace of new reservations, currently at 17,000 and climbing quickly.
I just love how he's so excited about 17,000 orders, like it's a big deal, when Rivian has 55,000 orders plus 100,000 Amazon van orders. 17,000 orders isn't a lot. I mean, okay. Now, it is growing fast. If they went from 13,000 at the end of September to 17,000 in 6 weeks, that's a big jump for them. That's another 4,000 orders. But, Cybertruck booked like, I don't know, 100,000 orders in a couple days. Okay, he's got to get excited about this stuff, but that just seems like it's pushing it to me.
Which has also spurred us to increase the total production quantity of the Dream Edition up to 520, both to accommodate demand and also to recognize the landmark EPA 520 miles achievement.
So I think this is a little bit dishonest. My recollection was that Lucid's original plan was to deliver 577 versions of the Dream Edition. When you go back, I don't know when it was lowered to less than 520. Maybe it was 500, but my recollection is they were planning to deliver 577 of them in the beginning. Maybe I got that wrong, but big deal you increased it to 520. Do they actually have 520 customers for this vehicle who are actually going to pay for them? We'll see. $170,000 plus. I mean, there are a lot of rich people who will pay for anything, I guess, but we'll see. We'll see how much of a market there is for that $170,000 vehicle. We'll see how long it takes them to satisfy those orders. Certainly selling at $170,000 generates more revenue, so that's why that Q4 revenue number is going to be really interesting to see. Next up, we have Sherry House talking about how many vehicles they expect to deliver in 2022 and acknowledging the supply chain could be a problem.
Looking onward to the fourth quarter, we are incredibly excited about the road ahead. We expect to ramp up production and continue to increase customer deliveries of the Lucid Air. We're seeing increasing interest in the Lucid Air with over 17,000 current reservations. Heading into 2022, we remain committed to our plan to achieve 20,000 units in the calendar year. However, this plan is not without risk given the extraordinary supply chain and logistics challenges that the automotive industry has been facing.
From my perspective, they're already covering their asses because they know they're not going to deliver 20,000 vehicles in 2022. So they've already started making the excuse of the supply chain, which is obviously a legitimate excuse. There are supply chain issues. Everybody's facing them. But we're committed to 20,000 vehicles, but we're not really going to make it because of supply chain. That's the way I heard it because I'm a cynic and I'm Lucid's biggest critic. And you notice they keep saying the same things over and over again. 17,000. They must have mentioned 17,000 reservations or 17,000 orders. I don't know how many times. They mentioned the 520 plus, the 500-mile range thing like a bunch of times. Technology, the word technology gets said over and over and over again. So a lot of saying the same thing over and over again, a lot of fluff as usual for Lucid Motors, and not a lot of substance. Next, I want you to hear Peter talking about the future of Lucid Air.
We will soon start to deliver Lucid Air Grand Touring models, followed by Touring and Air Pure next year.
I love how he says we're going to start delivering Grand Touring soon. You've got to deliver 520 Lucid Air Dream Editions before you start delivering the Grand Touring, right? Because you said you're going to deliver 520 Dream Editions. Well, at your pace, I don't think you're getting to 520 this year. Maybe you're hoping to get to 520 this year and you're going to start delivering the Grand Touring next year. But that, we'll see. That seemed a little iffy there. I didn't quite get that. And then they're going to move on to the Touring Edition and the Air Pure Edition next year. An analyst asked them when they would start delivering the Pure, which is the $77,000 version, which most likely will have a price increase just because of supply chain issues and the cost of goods and everything's going up. They didn't say anything about that, but that seems probable. And Peter, I think he pushed that off towards the end of 2022, if I heard him correctly. And he also pushed off Lucid Gravity in response to another question off to late 2023. I think Pure was second half of 2022, if I heard him correctly. Peter also talked about a future versions. He talked vaguely about future versions of the Lucid Air that would have less range and cost less money. Listen to this.
Moving to our Air lineup, the longer view will see production expanding to include Touring and Pure models, as well as future variants. With our in-house technology establishing Lucid Air as the new benchmark for EV efficiency, we will be quick to maximize this potential. Because if we can achieve 516 miles with just a 112 kilowatt-hour battery pack, it's easy to imagine a smaller pack and the weight and cost savings afforded by it, which would allow for a much more attainable EV that can still achieve 300 plus or 400 plus miles of range.
So the pitch, if you buy the Lucid story that they're much more efficient than everybody else is, as they scale their production, they will be able to come out with a future version of the Air that will cost less than the Pure, that might have 300 or 350 miles of range instead of 400 miles of range. And in response to an analyst, again, Peter talked about how they would be able to use a smaller battery pack and that would cost less. And so it would cost, because the battery pack or the batteries are one of the biggest expenses in a vehicle, reducing the battery pack size means you'll spend less money on batteries, so they'll be able to deliver a less expensive vehicle. Didn't go further than that, didn't go in depth and how inexpensive he thought they'd be able to get the Air down to. I'm not sure how much of a market there is for this vehicle at a lower price point. I'm not sure it makes sense if you're branding yourself as a luxury brand to now lower your prices down to $60,000 or $50,000. I don't know if that really fits, but we'll see where they go with that. That's certainly a down the road thing at 2023 at the earliest, and maybe 2024, since they're supposedly going to be making all these Air Pures for $77,000 and have a huge market for that, right? And when you look at their financial projections from the SPAC merger, their average selling price out to 2025 through 2025 is $100,000 a vehicle. So if you start selling $50,000 or $60,000 vehicles, it really screws up your revenue and profit plan that you told us about in July and February. Now, as I mentioned before, they're not telling us about they didn't report on the current set of deliveries in these numbers because these numbers were Q3. Here's Peter talking about how we're going to hear about that in Q4.
We actually have a full report on customer deliveries during our Q4 call. So watch this space for more.
And one other quick thing I want to mention is this moment where Sherry House attributed cost of goods sold from the Lucid Air in the third quarter when they didn't sell any Lucid Airs. That's the way I heard this. Listen, she was talking about cost of supplying batteries to Formula E, which makes sense to include that in cost of goods sold. But then she included some other costs, which seems like an accounting quirk. Accounting is weird, so I don't know what's going on there, but listen to this.
In Q3, Lucid recognized revenue of $232,000, predominantly related to the use of our battery packs in the Formula E race series. There is seasonality of this revenue stream, and similar to 2020, we expect to see the lion's share of battery pack revenue in Q4. The cost of revenue was $3.3 million and includes cost of goods sold related to the start of production at AMP1 that occurred in September.
So first of all, their revenue is from selling batteries to Formula E series, and that revenue is seasonal, but that revenue is tiny compared to what they're hoping to achieve with the Lucid Air. I don't understand how you can attribute costs of AMP1, which is where they're going to be building their factory and where they're going to be building Lucid Air. I don't understand how you can attribute that to cost of goods sold when you haven't sold the goods yet. But again, accounting quirks are accounting quirks. I can't explain it, and it may very well make sense from an accounting perspective. A couple last minute things from the investor call. An analyst named John Murphy from Bank of America asked Peter some questions about volume goals and about raising capital sooner. And Peter said their goal was to produce and deliver 20,000 vehicles in 2022 and 50,000 vehicles in 2023. He mostly dodged the questions. Then Sherry House said that she thought that she didn't think it was necessary to raise money at this time. So the argument is the stock price is up. Rivian stock price is up. Lucid stock price is up. This would be a great time to raise money since they're expecting their cash to run out before the end of 2022. Why not raise capital now while you're on a high? And Sherry said, well, we have $4.8 billion. Sherry is like, well, we have $4.8 billion. That should take us well into 2022 or well through 2022. And they have big CapEx coming in 2020. That seems like it would be a good time to raise money. And she also said that they don't have any debt yet. So she seemed to be suggesting that maybe instead of raising money by selling stock, they might raise money by borrowing money. Unclear what the decision making is there. It seems to me like when the stock price is up this high, this would be a good time to raise money. The market's going crazy. Might as well take advantage of it. But I actually thought that might happen going into the call, and I'm glad that Murphy asked this question. I was a little surprised at the answer. Maybe they just had to be careful, but it was almost like they poo-pooed the idea, like, no, we're not going to do that. There were a couple questions about Project Gravity from Murphy, from Bank of America, and also from Citibank. And Rawlinson said that they expect production of Project Gravity to start later in 2023, and they don't intend to unveil Project Gravity until sometime in 2022, later in 2022 maybe, he said. They said that their order book of the $1.3 billion of orders for the 13,000 or 17,000 reservations was, in their words, a nice blend of orders. It's not all Air Pures, according to them. It's Dream Edition, Grand Touring, Touring, and Pure in some reasonable distribution. They didn't provide hard numbers. They said, well, if you look at the numbers, and this is fair, 1.3 billion for and this is, it sounded like if it was $1.3 billion for 17,000 orders, that would be an average price of close to $80,000, which would mean they're almost all Air Pures. As I understood what Sherry House said, the $1.3 billion in orders booked was for the 13,000 orders. So that works out to about $100,000 average selling price. There was a question from Pickering Energy about gross margins, and as I recall it, Sherry House said that she doesn't expect them to have competitive margins until mid-decade. In other words, they're not really going to be making much money until 2026, which is pretty consistent with what they put in the documents from the SPAC merger, that they're not going to make significant profits until 2026, and even then it won't be that much. This is a company that's making a play for the future, and their real profits would be down the road if they're successful. And I do see from my notes that Rawlinson did say that the Pure would debut in the later part of 2022. It wouldn't be early 2022, it would be later. So that's what I got. I don't have any big conclusions. I remain skeptical of Lucid Motors. I still think there's strong potential for there to be a fraud. There's not enough detail in this earnings report for me to say anything. It's not audited financial numbers. Q4 will also lead to an annual report. I wonder if we're going to get audited financial numbers, whether that's going to change anything. I don't have enough information yet to say, yes, I was right, they're evil, they're liars, they're frauds. What I've seen, I still have a lot of questions. I still think this pushing dirt around is the big smoking gun from the Q3 call. But that's not a whole lot. They did deliver cars. They got Motor Trend to say it's a great car. They got a lot of great reviews from a lot of people. Now the question is, can they deliver to scale? And are they lying about the battery size? Because as I read the numbers, they're lying about the battery size. There's no way that's a 118 kilowatt hour pack. But maybe I'm wrong. We'll see. I don't expect, I have this bet with Ricky from 2-Bit Da Vinci and my friend Abe from Clubhouse that I think they're not going to deliver 100 cars by the end of the year. They think they are going to deliver 100 cars by the end of the year. If Lucid has already delivered over 30 cars and they delivered 25 in the last weekend, then they're probably going to make the 100 by the end of the year. We'll see. But I'm not going to trust the numbers until I see the financial statement from Q4, which hopefully will be the annual report. Maybe there will be some audited numbers. We'll see. And are we going to be able to tell how many of these were delivered to actual customers versus employees? Up in the air. But let's see what they do. So thank you for watching. Please check out the t-shirts. Tesla Air is one of my new favorite t-shirts. That's at elonbits.com. The stainless steel water bottle, the other t-shirts, elonbits.com. Thank you so much to the Vasa Law Firm in Sweden and all my Patreon supporters. You can support this channel on Patreon, linked below. Please check out my channel on Locals, The Daily Lie. From now on, my Sunday live streams will be on The Daily Lie. I will record them and I will replay them on YouTube. But if you want to see them live, they'll be on The Daily Lie. YouTube has demonstrated to me that they cannot be trusted with live streams because they keep demonetizing my videos for no good reason. And they just told me one of the reasons they demonetized the video, and it was total nonsense. Really, really tricky, and I just don't like having to panic and worry about whether they're going to be demonetized me. So my live stream videos on Sundays will be on Locals. I will record them. I will edit them for brevity and for content to make sure I don't get demonetized by YouTube. And then I will post them on YouTube later on Sunday. Thank you so much for watching.